What's up, YouTube? I know, this isn't Death Shadow either. You'll have to deal with it. It was just like a fun league I played through last night. I did actually go through, though, and updated, like, all of my Death Shadow lists. If you notice on the left side over here, like, the whole... Oh, sorry, that side. The whole list of decks is a lot smaller than it has been. Went through and cleared out some stuff that wasn't really working, cleaned up some lists. So I'm pretty excited to get to play some of those this week, some of the updated versions. And normally when we start off a stream, we kind of make some adjustments on the fly, take some chat considerations in, and build our list before we start streaming. But I decided to try out like putting together the list exactly how I want to run them ahead of time, so we can like get more into a rhythm of just starting the stream, jumping straight to the leagues, going over the decks as we go, kind of save some time there so we can hopefully get in some more games of Magic when we're live on stream. But this, as we can see, was a Murktide league, which I am trying to get more leagues in with Murktide, not only because it's a deck that I want to pick up a little bit more, and I think I'm getting like slowly a little bit more comfortable with it. It's also just a really good deck and probably one of, if not the best, actual fair mid-range deck going around right now. So I'm wanting to try out some configurations, see what's kind of working for me. And in this case, I decided to find some room for some Ledger Shredders, just a couple, but in place of like this second Spell Snare and the third Consider. So trying out the Ledger Shredder. I know that people say it's bad into Bowmaster, but I think with like your 4 bolt or 4 heat, 3 bolt, you got a lot of ways to deal with Bowmaster. Plus, it just provides you a really great like late game card advantage, or card selection engine, I should say. Card advantage kind of if you have expressive iteration, but it just helps filter things out a little bit. Smooths out your draws, gives you a nice little flying body that can be really good into things like Yawgmoth, great into decks that clog up the ground like Bowmaster and the tokens, great into anything that you might want to like hold up mana, double spell on your opponent's turn, or if they're double spelling like the Cascade decks, you can get a couple extra triggers that way, outgrow some Rhinos. So this is what we got. Sideboard, not really a ton of changes from the last list. I did swap out the 2 subtleties for a second copy of Dress Down. Moved to Dress Down from the main to the side and dropped the second subtlety for a second Engineered Explosives. Subtlety hadn't really been that impressive to me. I don't like the play pattern of like subtlety on an opponent's turn 1 grief. I'd rather just have like a bolt or heat or fury or something to deal with that grief. I feel like the line of having my opponent evoke a grief and then I evoke a subtlety, if they just choose to put that grief back on top, then I have to deal with it the next turn anyway and hope that I have like Counterspell or Stern Scolding or something. But to me, I kind of like that play pattern of just let the first one resolve and then find a removal spell more. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe we run into some scam and we get to test it out. Maybe we don't. Who knows? We've got options. I mean, we've got options. I know how the options go, so it might be a little misleading. But as always, we're getting into here. Deck list down below. Link to the Discord. Link to the Twitter if you want to come see when a live stream's going, or when a stream is going live. And yeah, that's about it. Turn 1. This is a play pattern I've been trying to get out of. Usually I'll just like jam the Dragon's Rage Channeler on 1 and hope it survives, hope something relevant happens. Instead, decide to go for the Preordained, try to get Delirium on Channeler before I drop it down. But unfortunately, probably not getting Delirium too quickly. And up against Aether Vial, like I figure my Counterspell is pretty dead. So I kind of want to capitalize on that before Vial gets up to 2 in case this is Merfolk. So that's why you saw me like hold up Counterspell turn 2 instead of going for Channeler plus Bolt. Because maybe I do kill a Merfolk, but there's also a pretty good chance that I just never do anything with that Counterspell. I actually didn't know until the Trickster that this was Merfolk. Flame of Anor, kind of an interesting take. I think I've heard of this Flame of Anor Merfolk list before, but I've never played against it. So it's cool to finally see it in action. Unfortunately, opponent's got a pretty decent rollout here with Flame of Anor, the Vial, and Force of Negation. So if we're assuming like 4 Flame of Anor, some number of Force Negation, maybe some Lightning Bolts, that's a lot of non-creature spells to have in your Merfolk list. I do find an answer to this Violin. Counterspell on the Trickster just to try to slow stuff down as much as we possibly can. Maybe give ourselves a chance to draw into a Murktide or find like an expressive iteration, something like that, to maybe start trying to pull back into the game. Tide Shaper, pretty okay. It could kick it and take us off a red source, but I don't think it matters all that much. Another Tide Shaper on top. So opponent does have a clock starting to form. Little Master of the Pearl Trident. So 1 unknown. Tide Shaper off the top. If Preordain's able to find us like a removal spell, Iteration's okay. Iteration was not okay. Kind of hoping that they just fire off a Flame of Anor here so I can at least counter that. Maybe give myself a chance. But it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Instead, they're just going to go to their main phase, tack in, put us down to 4, 1 turn clock. And then they have the Flame of Anor, which they decided to fire off while I'm tapped out. I couldn't Spell Pierce it anyway with the 2 extra mana, so no big deal. Good to go to game 2. Now that we have an idea of what we're up against, we get to make some adjustments. Boarded out these pierces, the counter spells. Boarded out the Spell Snare too. They do have a lot of 2-drop Merfolk, but at the same time, like, I'm a little worrisome that if they have Vial, Cavern of Souls, my counter spells are just going to be dead. And since Bolt and Flame of Anor and Force Negation aren't 2-drops, it seems a little risky. But we get to keep a reasonable 7. The double Ragavan helps us fight through this Bolt on turn 1. We've got Fury to maybe get a nice 2-for-1. Expressive Iteration to get back in the game. They go Tide Shaper pass. So since my opponent didn't play out a 2-drop, I'm kind of assuming they might have like a Lightning Bolt here. We just got Tide Shaper into Lord, which means Evoked Fury after the Ledger Shredder gives us not only a Connive trigger, lets us 2-2 our damage, knock out both of their little fishies here. Which you did see me play the EE for 0 last turn. That was just to try to guarantee I could hit the land drop. Like, obviously, I would like to EE for more against fish, but they're missing land drops. We're finding our rhythm here with a little bit of tempo, so I thought finding the land was just a little more important. Mystical Dispute gives us a Ledger Shredder trigger and a Connive trigger. Decide to flip away the Fury so that we can Unholy Heat here and then have Murktide Regent next turn. And opponent decides to scoop it up. Pretty quick clock with a Channeler and a decent sized Ledger Shredder. Really showing some Ledger Shredder power there. Getting all these Connives. Pretty good hand on the draw here. We've got like a turn 1 play in Channeler. We've got some filtering with our baubles. We get to bauble ourselves first, see if we want to fetch or not, and then Channeler and bauble again afterwards. Like, we missed a Surveil, but we kind of make up for it with that first filter off the fetch land. Double Tide Shaper A. Be a real shame if somebody were to Fury that and turn on Delirium. Bum, bum, bum. Now we got Mystical Dispute for a Violin. We got Stern Scolding for a smaller fish. Mystical Dispute could also hit a Flame of Anor, which is one of the reasons I want a Stern Scolding here instead of Mystical Dispute. Is like Mystical Dispute does also hit Violin that Stern Scolding doesn't. It hits Flame of Anor that Stern Scolding doesn't. So some pretty big considerations. We could play a Murktide, but I don't think we really need to. And it looks like opponents going straight for the Flame of Anor, trying to get the double-sided value off Mutavault. So you do have to remember with Flame of Anor that it does check on cast, not on like resolution. So they get to say, oh, I've got a wizard. I get 2 types as soon as I put this card on the stack. So you can't like respond and kill the wizard and remove a type or remove an option off Flame of Anor. So you have to be a little bit careful of that at times. Either way, we get to go to, I think this is game 2, or no, match 2. Yeah. Put it on Hammertime. I do think it's funny. I know we always make these like tinfoil hat theory jokes about Magic Online and algorithms and stuff like that. I do think it's really funny that the only times that I've played against Hammertime in the last 3 months or 2 months at least have been when I registered Murktide. And this is supposed to be like a fairly rough matchup for Murktide. So I found that really, really funny. You get the iteration into double removal spell. That's always fun. But yeah, like the last challenge I played against Hammertime, the last league I played with Murktide, I played against Hammertime twice. We could dash the Ragavan, but I really want to hold up Lightning Bolt and Counterspell. And if I dash Ragavan and they block, then I have to use the Lightning Bolt. I don't really want to use it if I don't have to yet. Unfortunately, we are going to use it here to try to set up like killing a construct, attacking it with the other Ragavan, clear off the board, and then just have Counterspell up. So a little bit of hope and pray. Preordain's nice. I want to attack first because if they don't block, I'm definitely preordaining. If they do block, then I have to kind of weigh the risk reward of them double spelling potentially. So like right here, it does feel a little bit bad because they do have double 2-drop. It's not the end of the world, but it was kind of that moment of like, hey, I'm giving this up by casting the preordain, giving the double counterspell up. We could Ledger Shredder into Heat. We could Ledger Shredder hold up Counterspell, which doesn't make a lot of sense with Cauldron Complete in hand, so we have to kill off the Stoneforge there. Now our opponent's hand is down to Cauldron Complete, 2 unknowns. If we find another land, we can Ledger Shredder plus Preordain plus pay for Esper Sentinel. So this is definitely one of the times that Ledger Shredder looks a little more awkward. Not horrible, but especially in a top deck war like this, I really don't want to give my opponent another card if I don't have to. And I want to hold on to this Unholy Heat if possible, because I feel like there's much more valuable things to knock off than an Esper Sentinel when I've got 5 lands out. Like so. We're going to kill off Pure Steel Paladin. We do not want that to hit the battlefield, because if they start equipping, we can respond to an equip with like Unholy Heat the Pure Steel Paladin. But if we do that, then they'll still have something equipped up. And unfortunately, something equipped up is probably more than I can deal with at the moment. Pithing Needle, name Mishra's Bauble, smart. I've already used my Fiery Islet, so unless they try to blind name a fetch land, Mishra's Bauble is the only other activated ability I have in the deck. And it's going to fire off Surge of Salvation. We'll go ahead and double up and get another Ledger Shredder trigger as well. And we know their last card in hand is Cauldron Complete. So my only consideration now should be like trying to find a way to not get Pure Steel Paladin. They've already seen 2 of them in the top 20. So I need to try my best to close out the game before they can find a third one. They could also find a Forge Anew. That would do it. But if they found Forge Anew, they'd have to tap down to like 1 attacking Ink Moth. So I know I could kill that or block that 1. Unfortunately, the 4th land, but they could still only do 1 Ink Moth, even with Forge Anew. So it's kind of Pure Steel Paladin or bust. And with this attack, they're going to have to start chumping with Ink Moths very quickly, unless they find 3rd Pure Steel Paladin. Oh, boy. Love to see it. 3rd Pure Steel in the top 20, 21, something like that. Sideboarding. I've seen a bunch of lists taking out all the counter spells. I'm trying out different sideboarding configurations. We had some comments in the last video about boarding out, or not boarding out Ragavan. I still don't like Ragavan in the matchup, but you'll see, spoiler alert in the video. I know y'all don't want it, everything spoiled. We are going to play against Hammertime again. And I kind of shift a few different sideboard options. So this one, I tried out keeping 1 Ragavan in on the play. I think one of the later games or later matches, I keep in like 3 Ragavans. So I'm trying out different options, even if it doesn't play out that way, or even if it doesn't look like it. So just keep that in mind. Been over a Preordain. Been over a Consider. We'll keep the removal spell. Start attacking in. But it's also one of the reasons that I really don't like sideboard guides. And people ask for them all the time. Like, oh, do you have a sideboard guide for Demir's Shadow or Grixis Shadow or whatever? And I'm really, really iffy on them because I feel like a lot of the time it restricts your ability to adapt or to change your game plan, because they're just like, oh, sideboard guide, X in, Y out, done. Let me talk about this line real quick. So I ended up having an upkeep opportunity to Unholy Heat. I'm trying to find a cast into the fire, because I think that's my only potential out here. Decided to do this on my upkeep in case maybe I flipped over Delirium. I could also draw into a 2nd copy of Unholy Heat to kill off the Ginger Brute. But my opponent does have a Solitude for the Ledger Shredder here, which means I can't double spell and get a Connive trigger. But I can still maybe rip into Delirium and another Unholy Heat. Consider doesn't really do anything for me. So we do, unfortunately, find the 2nd Unholy Heat, which would have been cool if we could have flipped over Delirium on the first one. Consider might have found us Delirium, but we wouldn't have gotten Delirium on the first Unholy Heat, which means we still would have come up 3 damage short of killing the dude, the Ginger Brute. So on to match number 3. Like I said, we do end up playing against Hammertime again. So we get to try out some configurations. Nice little spell snare on a Stoneforge here. Don't want an extra copy of Ledger Shredder, especially when that one in the yard gives me Delirium. You just hold up Counterspell this time for like another copy of Stoneforge or something. And then we get to untap with Expressive Iteration again. We could go Ledger Shredder into iteration, but I really just want to hold up a potential like answer here. Take the Unholy Heat, keep the counter spell on top so we can draw into that next turn. Opponent's going to fire up some Ink Moth next eye, so we'll just kill off one of these. Make our life a little bit easier. Then next turn we can attack, play the Ledger Shredder, hold up the counter spell, hold up the bolt. Urza Saga is pretty decent, but hopefully we can kind of clear out our opponent before it matters. Sounds like a train in the background. I don't even know where the closest train tracks are. Jeez. It's terrifying. Be sitting down one day and hear train noises. All right, so they do have a Stone Forge. I'm pretty much not countering anything. Let me back up real quick. So I'm not countering anything because my opponent is going to have to block one of my Dragon's Rage Channelers to live. So if I wait for their turn for them to fire up the Ink Moth Nexus, then I can go to bolt the Ink Moth, and even if they have a Surge of Salvation off the plains, I can counterspell it and kill through that. So that's why I'm not countering any of like this Stone Forge, Shadow Spear stuff, because I have the lethal and they have to stop me. I could also like bolt them and, you know, we got options. Sideboarding. Again, like I said, I'm changing up the configuration a little bit post board. So this time I kept in 3 Ragavans instead of 1 or whatever it was. And I was instantly rewarded by my opponent mulliganing and not having a 1-drop. So apparently that's why Ragavan stays in post board. Now, I also could have played out the Ragavan turn 1, but I didn't want to risk my opponent having like a Stone Forge or a Sanctifier on Vec or something that they'd be really happy trading into. So that's why I did not play out the turn 1 Ragavan. Yet another point in the camp of why I think having a bunch of Ragavans in post board isn't very good. Because like a lot of times I don't think it's the play you want to make on turn 1. But we'll see. Solituding this Ragavan off a Surge of Salvation. So if they had the Pure Steel in their opening hand, then it kind of felt like they were waiting until turn 3 so they could play it out plus have a protection spell. They just used a protection spell on that Solitude, so maybe there's a chance they don't have a second protection spell. Either way, we will get down this Ragavan. Despite not holding up Stern Scolding, I think getting down a threat is more important. Especially when I have all these removal spells. So it's like only Sanctifier on Vec that we really have some issues with. So they did have the triple Surge of Salvation, or they had one that they exiled to Solitude, second one that we hit off the top with Ragavan, and third one in hand. So never doubt that your opponent can't draw hot fire. But we get to hold up Stern Scolding for the Sanctifier on Vec that I'm naturally apprehensive of. Sanctifier on Vec, definitely one of the cards that has caused me more anguish in the last couple of years. Then Moto slowing down is the second card that's caused me anguish. Either way, we got Ragavan, we got Channeler, opponent's down to 2 cards. Could play out an Esper Sentinel. I don't think that really does much more than anything else for me. Kind of just want to... Old McDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. See what I did there? Keep a bolt on top. We'll take the bolt, just throw it at their face. Because now we've got EE that can help us against another Sanctifier on Vec. Opponent has an empty board state at the moment. So between like Bolt and EE, hopefully we should be able to cover most everything. If they did have like an Urza Saga here, we'd be able to untap and Blood Moon to take care of that. Which I'm kind of like holding on to this Blood Moon in the case that something like that, Inkmoth Nexus, Urza Saga, something like that comes down and makes my life a little more difficult. But obviously I don't want to just throw it out for no reason if it's not actually going to hurt my opponent. So since they went and got a Cauldron Complete last turn, I'm assuming they're really unlikely to block here. And turns out I was right. So they don't block on Holy Heat. And I'd be completely fine if they did block, because I do just have a Channeler attacking in. I hear that's pretty good. So this is match number 4. Mulligan decision before we fast forward. I think it was just like a no lander, right? Yeah. So 7 cards, no lands, easy mulligan. Second hand, we do have a couple counter spells. Hope that we can kind of get ahead of what our opponent's doing. I didn't really want the Spell Snare because I'm on the play with the double counter spell. So instead of having Spell Snare on turn 2, I can just have counter spell. And so that feels a little bit better to dig me a little farther for a threat. Turn 1 tap Breeding Pool. My immediate thought is like the Temur Murktide deck. That's been showing up everywhere. It does play a copy of Breeding Pool. So not their most ideal turn 1 land, but that's kind of the deck that I think jumps out the most to me right now. Find us a little Spell Pierce, dig for a land. Play out a Ragavan, hold up Counterspell. So if they do have like a removal spell for the Ragavan, then I can maybe Counterspell it or Counterspell what's on their turn. Instead, they go for a Dead Gaunt. So now we know it's Rhinos instead of the Temur Murktide deck, in which case I would rather hold up Counterspell for a Rhinos than throw out like a Spell Pierce or something on the Dead and Gone. Alas, as you all know, when it comes to Modern, if you stumble, or even if you don't stumble, your Rhino's opponent's going to have it. So they do have Violent Outburst, we do have Spell Pierce, they do have Force Negation, and we do not find an Unholy Heat. We do find another Lightning Bolt, so maybe we can like set up double bolting a Rhino, just hope the situation doesn't get any worse for us. Which... Again, if you know anything about Modern, hoping the situation doesn't get worse for you means the situation's going to get worse for you. So, kind of a rough one. I do think it's funny that decks like Rhinos are kind of able to... It's because of the one card combo nature of the deck. Like, you just need a Cascade spell, and your deck suddenly feels like it's comboing off. But having the Violent Outburst, the Force of Negation, the blue card, and a backup Rhinos was pretty funny. Sideboarding, got rid of a bunch of like Lightning Bolts, brought in the extra counter spells. My opponent aggressively Force of Negations a turn 1 Preordain, and then Mystical Disputes, my second Preordain. So I'm just like, what on earth is going on here? We'll go ahead and throw down the EE, because if they have another Force of Negation, or we're not, could have sworn out they're down the EE there. Oh well. We've got Force of Negation if they decide to go for Rhinos on their turn, but if they don't, I hit the land, so now I can EE, protect it with Counterspell in case they have another Force of Negation. Pass the turn. Have the Shardless Agent. We are going to go ahead and counterspell the Crashing Footfalls instead of EE. Big reason for that decision is EE provides a lot more flexibility when it comes to like when I want to utilize this effect. So if I go for EE on the Rhinos, and then go to my turn, hold up Counterspell, then I have to hold up that 2 mana like indefinitely, or they can resolve another Rhinos. But if I hold up the EE instead, it means that I don't have to hold up that mana. I can just have it available after they get Rhinos down, and that's just as good. Go for a Murktide. I was kind of expecting another Mystical Dispute. Turns out they did not have one, so I don't have to dispute their dispute, but I do have Force Negation, Ditch Dispute to make sure that my Murktide sticks around, because I don't really want it leaving the battlefield here. Channeler's a reasonable top deck, so get to attack in, play our Channeler, maybe counterspell something, get a little filtering going on. Again, Murktide's kind of a deck that's got a pretty good matchup into these Rhinos decks, because you do just have reasonably sized flying bodies to fly in over Rhinos. In our case, we get access to cards like Ledger Shredder that do a lot of work because they can outgrow a Rhino pretty quickly. So we saw Upkeep Dead and Gone. We had the Counterspell, but they had another Force Negation and a blue card. So they have double Force of Negation to us this game, and Mystical Dispute. But finding the Chalice of the Void means we can stop this Footfalls that's about to come off Cascade. Or come off Suspend, sorry. Kill off a Shardless Agent, counter a Crashing Footfalls. Opponent's got another Shardless Agent. It's just a vanilla 2/2. So like any sort of spell we can pretty much cast, any land or anything to allow us to play out the second Murktide is good. Or yeah, second time casting the Murktide, same Murktide. If they have another Mystical Dispute, that would be a little unfortunate here. Bounce effect could have been a little annoying, but if they don't have one for this turn cycle, then we get to untap with hard cast Force Negation, and that'll probably do enough to kind of seal the game for us. Opponent whiffs, scoops it up. We go on to game number 2 against the Rhinos Menace, or game number 3. Yeah, game number 3. Good opening hand. We've got some redraws. We've got Chalice. We've got Spell Pierce. One of Chalice doing some work here. So go for the turn 1 Preordain. Get Force of Negation again. Go ahead and throw down the Chalice, because if they do have another Force of Negation, another blue card, I'm pretty happy putting them down to 1 card while I still have like double Preordained Spell Pierce. And since they played out this Besage in the face of the Chalice, I'm pretty happy just main phasing Preordain, because they probably don't have another land. Turns out I was correct, and they scoop it up. We get to go to match number 5. Match number 5 on the play. We're doing really good on these die rolls. Hand's not thrilling, but I can't really throw back a hand that just has Channeler, Iteration, Murktide. Blood Crypt, Bolt means they're a scam more than likely. Kroxa was a little unexpected. Really good card. Just never expect to see it. Pretty okay ditching the extra land, because I feel like there's a reasonable shot my opponent's going to Thoughtseize me at some point, and having this extra Murktide would be pretty nice. Take the counterspell, put the Unholy Heat on top. Dash Ragavan is A-okay. You may have my Unholy Heat, and now I get down a Murktide with a counterspell backup, which is probably one of the strongest plays that you can make against any sort of a removal deck, especially if they want to spend their whole turn just like hard casting a Fury into a counterspell. That feels pretty good for us. A little Preordain, a little Consider, just to get some cards in the yard, get our Murktide slap on, hold up Counterspell and Unholy Heat instead of going for the second Murktide. I can just kill that, untap, play a big Murktide. Gets even better because my opponent's going to go for the Terminate here, which we get to counterspell. Now we don't have to worry about our Murktide dying. We just get to play out a second one, grow the first one to more than lethal. And attack in. Nice. Love to see it. Game 2, on the draw. Boarding out a bunch of the Ragavans. Pretty bad into Bowmasters. Board out Force Negation. I trimmed on one of the Pierces. And just brought in like the Furies. I brought in Stern Scolding. Dress Downs. I think that's about everything. I'm going to go for an Undying effect on the Ragavan. This play on my side might have been greedy. I went for the Evoked Fury. I was like, okay, I've got Spell Pierce to potentially hit like a Fable of the Mirror Breaker or Spell Snare for a Bowmasters or a Dothy or something like that. If they have another Undying effect, I can Spell Pierce it. So I kind of figured, like, I'll just take this opportunity to get the Ragavan off the board. They protected it. Maybe they don't have a follow-up. And it looks like I was kind of right that they didn't have the follow-up. Do have a Fury coming off the top, so we know they've got 3 unknowns and a Fury. I'm expecting a Bowmaster flash in, which they do not show me, so we'll just go ahead and fire off the Bauble now, because if they didn't have a Bowmaster on my upkeep, I doubt they're going to flash one in into turn, because they didn't know I was going to have another redraw. Get to nab the Fable with that Spell Pierce. So getting to convert on Spell Pierce in like the mid portions of the game is really, really nice. Go ahead and get our redraw on while they can't Bowmaster us. And now we know they have 2 unknowns and a Fury. They haven't missed a land drop yet, so they might have another land. Another Fable's pretty decent, but we do get to kill off the Shaman token. They didn't play a land, so Fury, 2 unknowns. They ditch double Lightning Bolt. Double Lightning Bolt, don't hard cast the Fury into a bunch of mana. We find an Expressive Iteration, which is fantastic. Take our Shredder, get Polluted Delta so we can get an island in case for some reason they still have Blood Moon in their deck. Like, I know you take for granted, oh, your opponent's going to board out Blood Moon against you, and they should more often than not, but there's still a large number of people that will just, like, keep the Blood Moons in and be like, I'm going to get you. So, having access to a basic or two is still really nice, even if you think it's not necessary. Could go for removal spell on the Reflection. I'll kind of mention this line. So I could go for removal spell on Reflection. My concern is they have an Undying effect. I do not want to have to counterspell an Undying effect here because I know my opponent's got the Fury and they've got the mana to cast it. So I really want to focus my counterspell on that Fury. So if they went for an Undying effect, if I went for removal, they went for Undying effect, it would probably be resolving anyway. So why not go to their turn, hope they hard cast the Fury, or go for something to get some value off of this Reflection, counterspell that, and then go back to my turn where I can have like removal spell, they Undying, I second removal spell, and maybe we see if it resolves from there. I just think that first Ledger Shredder trigger like doesn't matter all that much. Then turns out they didn't even have an Undying effect, so don't I look the fool. But what they do have is another copy of Fury, unfortunately. And they start to tap mana. I don't really know what that mana was for. I'm a little concerned. So, like, I went for the Unholy Heat with the trigger on the stack. In case they wanted to respond with, like, an Undying effect, I would get a Shredder trigger. Unfortunately, they did not. But they do have a Bowmaster. We finally get to cash in on the Stern Scolding. I decided to Scolding instead of Spell Snare because I'm really trying to find a Murktide, and Spell Snare can hit Terminate where Scolding cannot. So I just thought that was a little more important. There are some cases where, like, oh, Spell Snare can't hit Grief, but what's it called? The Stern Scolding can. So it's not a perfect formula, but I'm more concerned about Terminate than I am, what's it called? Grief. That being said, I will counterspell the Grief if it comes down, because attacking with Murktide, not having to worry about anything on the crackback, feels pretty nice too. So, little 4-1 with Murktide. Really nice. I'd say I'm pretty happy with like 90% of the list. Spell Snare had some times that it was pretty good. It's still not one of my favorite cards, but it's been better than I would normally give it credit for. Maybe trading out like a Consider for the 4th Bolt. I liked the Ledger Shredders. I thought they were really good, that league. The Force Negation in the main has been okay, but that could very easily just be the 4th Bolt, 3rd Consider, 3rd Shredder, something like that. But the Force is really nice with like tapping out for Murktide or Ledger Shredder. In the sideboard, I'm not a fan of this Cast Into the Fire, so I'm probably going to end up cutting that. Maybe even cut the 2nd Engineered Explosives. What for? I'm not really sure yet. Maybe another Stern Scolding if I'm expecting a bunch of Yawgmoth and Scam. I've seen some people play Stone of Eric. It's pretty decent with like Fury, Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolt. Maybe I give Subtlety another try. Not really sure yet. But I've just been liking kind of adjusting the deck a reasonable amount between leagues as I try to get a feel for the play patterns and what I need to be doing and why I need to be doing that. So, if you are liking the Murktide content, if it's a deck you are wanting to see more of and kind of watch this learning process as we get used to the deck a little bit, then feel free to let me know down below. Remember, comments, things like that are what really help me know what kind of content you guys are looking for. And as always, if you're wanting to come hang out in the Discord and talk about the deck, talk about options, we'll have a link to that down below. Otherwise, hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your Monday. Get some good food, stay safe, enjoy some good company. I'll catch y'all back live later, probably tomorrow. If you're seeing this on Monday, probably Tuesday, the 31st, for a nice little Halloween stream. A little spooky. But hopefully we'll be able to do that, and I'll catch y'all there. Otherwise, have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Adios for now.